Good morning, class. We'll be continuing with our class on the Iliad by Homer. So I hope some of you were here in the last class where we discussed the introduction to the book, we discussed characters, we discussed the background, right? So we did all of those things. And today I'll be quickly moving through the epic summary, right? So we said that the Iliad is an epic and it contains 24 books, right? It is given as a 15,000 line poem, but then the edition that we are referring to and the one that we are prescribed is a prose edition, right? So we'll be covering the 24 books. We'll be doing a short summary and also with that, along with that, we'll be doing a brief analysis of the books that we'll be covering up, right? So I will be going a little quickly today because we have a lot to do. And then, towards the end of the class, I'll take your questions, right? So to probably towards the last 10 minutes of the class, we'll be taking up the questions that you have. You can always, put your questions in the question answer box that is provided to you, and we'll be taking up those questions, discussions, whatever there is at the end of the class today. Right. So let us quickly move on to the first book. Now, we already talked about the introduction. So the book begins with an invocation to the muse, personifying the inspiration for epic poetry. The poet wants to sing about the wrath of Achilles. We said that this is the central theme of the epic. Now, the epic narrative begins in the 10th year of the Trojan War. Achilles and Agamemnon bitterly quarrel as Apollo sends a plague to strike down the Greek forces. Chryses, the priest of Apollo, had come to Agamemnon. You remember that Achilles is our protagonist, right? And Achilles is on the Greek side, such as uh, and also Agamemnon is the commander-in-chief of the Greek army, right? And they used to win booty out of the war, and this booty, this war prize, had been these women that we are talking about in this paragraph here. So Chryses, the priest of Apollo, Apollo is the sun god, had come to Agamemnon to seek the release of his daughter Chryses, taken captive earlier, captive as a war prize. Agamemnon's refusal had brought Apollo's anger and consequent plague upon the Greeks. A Greek assembly is called, but Agamemnon does not willingly part with the girl he has got his share as of the booty. In retaliation, he insists on capturing the lovely Briseis, the prize of Achilles. Right? So Agamemnon had Chryses to herself. Now, this priest, who's the father of Chryses, has prayed to the sun god Apollo that he should be, releasing his daughter, and therefore Agamemnon, who is the chief commander, commander-in-chief, says that he will take the prize of Achilles, right? And who is the girl Briseis, and Achilles is upset with that. So this results in the withdrawal of Achilles from the war on behalf of the Greeks. He appeals to his mother, the sea goddess Thetis, to intercede for him with Zeus. Thetis is the loving mother of Achilles, and she agrees to this. So Thetis is the one who makes this request to Zeus to help Achilles. Now, meanwhile, Chryses is sent back to her father with offerings to Apollo to propitiate his anger. The god is appeased. Thetis soars up to Mount Olympus, where all the gods reside, and grasping the knees of Zeus, appeals to him to grant Achilles the honor he deserves. Right? So this quarrel, as we said, is not really about uh, claiming the war prize. It is about the fact that Achilles feels insulted that Agamemnon is, not giving him his due prize, not giving him his due honor. So this quarrel is about honor rather than about being, about the women per se. So she appeals to Zeus to grant the Trojans victory after victory till the Greeks pay Achilles back what they have deprived him of. Zeus agrees to her request, but Hera, his wife, contends with him as she dislikes the help Zeus has promised the Trojans. Hephaestus, the son of Hera and the god of fire, succeeds in reconciling the two and brings back harmony to the assembly of gods and serving them the feast which all partake of. So, as we said, the gods have a direct influence on the happenings here in the war, right? So, and gods have children who are mortals, right? So that kind of a thing is also applicable here. That Cetus, who's the sea goddess, is asking for her son, who is immortal, right? And she asks for help to the god Zeus, who's the head of all the gods. And the gods intervene; they interfere in humanly affairs in the Trojan War. Okay. So, the poem focuses most centrally on the rage of a mortal, that is Achilles. It also concerns itself greatly with the motivations and actions of the gods. Right? So these are the two planes on which the poem works. Even before Homer describes the quarrel between Achilles and Agamemnon, he explains that Apollo was responsible for the conflict. In general, the gods in the poem participate in mortal affairs in two ways. First, they act as external forces upon the course of events, as when Apollo sends the plague upon the Achaean army, right? So there is a plague, there is a conflict, and therefore there is suffering. Now, second, they represent the internal forces acting on individuals. So you can, probably note these 2 points down. That firstly, gods have an external influence in terms of, you know, affecting the entire situation as Apollo sends the plague on the entire Greek army. And they also represent internal forces in terms of acting upon individuals. As when Athena, the goddess of wisdom, prevents Achilles from abandoning all reason and persuades him to cut Agamemnon with words and insults rather than his sword. But while the gods serve as a serious function in partially determining grave matters of peace and violence, life and death, they also serve one final function, that of comic relief, right? So we said that the conflict for the humans is severe, it is grave, and it is also tragic, right? Because it is a matter of life and death. But for the gods, it looks like a family feud, right? Where they in, partake of jealousy and, favoritism. All of those things happen for the gods. And those episodes with the gods are actually not more serious than the affairs of the mortal, but they provide comic relief in the poem, which is one of Homer's major contribution. Their intrigues, double dealings, and inane squabbles often appear humorously petty in comparison with the wholesale slaughter that pervades the mortal realm. Right? So, in the mortal realm, of course, we are talking about the war and the mass slaughter of the war. But for the Olympians, which are the gods and goddesses, it is about, their squabbles, their quarrels that we are getting to know of. In their submission to base appetites and shallow grudges, the gods of the Iliad often seem more prone to human folly than the human characters themselves. Now, this is another point that we can note that, the gods actually behave more like humans than the humans themselves do, right? In terms of practicing this um, practicing jealousy, favoritism, and other human follies, right? The gods are not completely noble or free from all flaws, right? They're not flawless, they're not noble. In fact, they have a lot of base appetites, right? So they indulge in lust, they indulge in jealousy, etc. And that makes them more prone to human folly, that makes them more human, so to say. So, we'll be talking about the anthropomorphic nature of gods, right? Anthropomorphic meaning that they are attributed human qualities as far as this epic is concerned. And then we have the concept of women who are exchanged as booty or awards for winning war to soldiers, right? So it may sound as very patriarchal, which it is, but then that is the kind of set up during those days. Now, the clash between Achilles and Agamemnon highlights one of the most dominant aspects of the ancient Greek value system, the vital importance of personal honor. Right? So, that is what we've been saying, that the conflict between Achilles and Agamemnon is not about anything else so much as it is about their personal honor. Both Agamemnon and Achilles prioritize their respective individual glories over the well-being of the Achaean forces. Right? So both of them actually consider um, their their own honor up above everything else. In the next book too, Zeus decides to deceive Agamemnon through a dream. He should attack Troy, he's told, as the Trojans will soon be crushed. The king reports the dream to the Greek elders. Then Agamemnon addresses the assembled troops, and to test their morale, he reminds the men of their wives and children of the long wait outside Troy. His words move the men to prepare to hasten home, but once again, divine intervention upsets their desire. Right? So these are two instances when you can see how the gods are influencing the battle. Right? So now when Hera has when Thetis has pleaded to Zeus to make the Greeks suffer losses in the battle, and so that they need Achilles and they beg to Achilles to come back, right? Meanwhile, Hera has also told Zeus to not do that, right? To support the Trojans, and therefore now finally Zeus decides, based on these two opinions, to deceive Agamemnon, to deceive the Greek commander in chief through a dream. And in this dream, he's told to attack Troy, and then we see that um, Agamemnon is convinced. He bases his strategy on this dream that he's seen, but then he also wants to actually check the morale of his soldiers. And again, we see this human side emerging, wherein the soldiers are also wanting to go back to their families, right? Remember that this is the 10-year war, and we are talking about the ninth year of the war. So people are tired, and soldiers are longing to go back home to their families. So his words move the men to prepare to hasten home, but once again, divine intervention upsets their desire. Hera and Athena, who support the Trojan cause, who are the patrons of the Greek cause, stop them in their tracks. Athena reaches Odysseus, asking him to persuade the Greeks to stay back till Helen is restored to them. Odysseus and Nestor inspire the soldiers to gain back their fighting spirit, and Agamemnon calls them to battle, and then follows the description of the men and ships of both the Trojans and Greeks. Right. So the description of the men and the ships is what we can see, where Homer talks about the magnitude or the large scale of the battle. So Achaeans or the Greeks are also called as the Achaeans. Flight to the ships serves three important purposes in the narrative. Right. So these are the three purposes that we can see when they want to run back to the ships. The first is that they prompt the speech of Odysseus and Nestor. Now, Odysseus and Nestor, we already talked about this, that they are these orators, these are people of wisdom who actually help reconcile or help parties to make peace with each other. So they so Homer's, you know, psychological sort of narrative comes up with Odysseus and Nestor, these orators who make peace between people. Now it shows just how dire the Greek situation has become. Now Achilles has withdrawn, and immediately we see that the Greek situation has become dire because Achilles was their greatest soldier, their greatest warrior. And with Achilles, he's also taken back his entire army, his entire troop. So the eagerness with which the troops flee back to the harbor not only testifies to the suffering that they must have already endured, but also bodes ill for the future efforts, which will prove much harder given the soldiers' homesickness and lack of motivation, right? So the soldiers are already tired, and therefore, to constantly keep fighting. They're homesick, they're tired, they do not have that kind of a motivation and enthusiasm. So fighting the battle is going to be difficult with soldiers who have lost their morale. Now, by pointing out to the intensity of the Greek suffering, the episode emphasizes the glory of the Greeks' eventual victory. Homer's audience knew well that the war between the Greeks and the Trojans ended in Troy's defeat. This episode indicates just how close the Greek army came to abandoning the effort entirely and returning to Greece in disgrace. That the troops prove able to rise from the depths of despair to heights of military triumph conveys the immensity of the Greek achievement, right? So the war ended, the Greek and Trojan War, the Trojan War ended in Greek or the Greek army winning, right? So you see that when we were talking about this the last time class, when we were saying that the epic actually helps us to believe in human potential, right? To believe in human um potential, nobility, etc. It gives us inspiration. So this is one of those episodes, right? So by pointing out to such situations, and these situations are repeated in the text. When Agamemnon would feel that he should not continue the battle, he asked them to leave, and so everybody's morale is down. But then they always gather themselves up and go back to battle. And to actually talk about this particular episode here, that once they had actually imagined that they would not go to battle anymore, right? But then they pick themselves up and rise to the moment, and therefore we can understand the immensity of Greek achievement and probably be inspired by it. So the epic also conveys these kind of things and help us reinstate our belief in human potential. So the flight to the ships indirectly results in the famous catalogue of the Achaean forces, right? So this is also one of the important functions with regard to the epic also, that the epic, as we said, talks about the great magnitude, the great scale on which things happen. And here, because of Homer's description, this flight to the ships, we also realize the entire catalog, the entire details of the Greek forces or the Greek army. Now, in book 3, Helen comes out, right? Helen, as we said, Helen of Troy is this beautiful woman, and since she has been abducted, the war is taking place, right? So Helen comes out and stands on the ramparts. Now, what are the ramparts? It is a defensive wall of a castle or a walled city having a broad top with a walkway and typically a stone parapet, right? So it is a structure, it is a wall, and Helen comes out there, and King Priam talks kindly to her, asking her to identify the Greeks standing below the gates of Troy. Paris appears in the field. So Helen has been captured by the uh, by uh, by King Paris, and now Paris appears on the field, dressed magnificently in full armor and challenging his enemies. But all his bravado melts as soon as he watches Menelaus menacingly appear on the scene. Now, so Menelaus has appeared on the scene. King Menelaus has appeared on the screen on the scene, and therefore Paris is immediately frightened. And Hector, who is the brother of Paris, right, another Trojan warrior, he shames Paris, charging him with cowardice. So finally, Hector, Prime agrees to fight. Sorry, Paris agrees to fight Menelaus. The Trojans and Greeks agree that whosoever wins, whether Paris or Menelaus, will get Helen with all her treasure. The war will end and the Greeks return home. Priam is called to seal the oath taking ceremony. So it is decided that rather than the entire armies fighting, these two, Paris or Menelaus, will fight with each other, and then whatever decision there is, they'll withdraw the tribe if they they'll withdraw the troops if they win. Now, Paris and Menelaus fight, but Paris is no match to his opponent. Aphrodite, who's the goddess of love, rescues him, enfolding him in mist and taking him from the battlefield to his bedchamber. Right. So again, the goddess has intervened between this conflict, this clash that was taking place, since Paris was kind of losing to Menelaus, and she takes Paris from the battlefield to his bedchamber. Helen is also taken there by the goddess. Since Paris cannot be traced, Agamemnon declares Menelaus to be the victor and claims Helen. Right? Since Paris cannot be found, then Agamemnon declares Menelaus as the victor, as the winner, and claims Helen. On Mount Olympus, the gods plan to break the truce, and Athena is sent down to break the peace. So this truce that has happened between the parties now, that Menelaus has been declared the winner, and he is to claim Helen now. This again is something which is interfered with by the gods. And now Athena is sent down to break the peace. Athena incites the Trojan Pandarus. Now, of course, you understand that the fight did not take place to the end, right? So Paris was kind of sent away by Aphrodite to his bedchamber anyway, from the battlefield. So it is not really, the end of the battle. So Athena incites the Trojan Pandarus to aim an arrow at Menelaus. Protected by Athena, Menelaus is not seriously injured, but the battle between the Greeks and the Trojans start again, right? So this battle that had stopped after the previous individual combat now begins again with the intervention of the gods. So Agamemnon is frightened to see Menelaus wounded, and the healer Macon, right? So Macon is a healer, is urgently summoned. The Greek soldiers are stirred to battle. The chiefs are summoned and praised. The Cretan captain Idomeneus, great and little Ajax and Nestor, the old soldier, all gather. Agamemnon speaks scornfully against Odysseus, watching his troops not yet ready for battle. That makes him flare up, and at once Agamemnon withdraws his charge. Like that, he speaks to all the chiefs of the Greek army, goading all to put in their best, and the Trojans smash them in strife. Apollo and Athena incite Trojans and Greeks respectively, and the two warring sides fight on. Right? So there are constant to and fro moments in terms of people trying to encourage their soldiers to fight, people actually thinking whether this battle is leading to any or leading anywhere or not, right? So that kind of a dilemma is always existing, and we see that the gods also contribute to that kind of a dilemma, and which is why you see this all happening, right? So now Agamemnon is again asking his army, he's again talking about the other army, inciting them, and therefore the battle begins again. Now, the first two books introduce the commanders of the Achaean forces, and the next two, which is book 3 and 4, introduce the Trojan forces. Priam, Hector, Paris, and Helen of Troy all make their first appearances in book 3, and their personalities begin to emerge. So, the Iliad, another thing that we can talk about within the Iliad, is that there are no clear villains, right? We were also talking about this in the last class, that it is not all black and white. Everybody is given some kind of a flaw, right? So no character is all good or all bad, right? They are all gray. So the story is told from the Greek perspective, but it does not demonize the Trojans, right? So we have a an objective perspective in terms of also describing the Trojans, right? It does not say that the Trojans are all villainous, and it does not demonize the Trojans. Now, book 5, the gods help the mortals and some of them get wounded. The scene in book 5 shifts back and forth from the battlefield to Olympus, right? So, the gods again help the mortals. Some of them get wounded, and now we see again that this clear, to and fro movement from the battlefield to Olympus, where the gods reside, right? So it is always that the gods are interfering in the war. They do not keep to themselves. They are not just mere observers, right? They are very much participating in the war. So Diomedes, the Greek hero, is aided by Athena and kills Pandarus. Aeneas, who is the son of Aphrodite, is wounded by Diomedes but is saved by Aphrodite. Right? So Diomedes kills Pandarus. Aeneas, who is the son of Aphrodite, is also wounded by Diomedes. Remember, Diomedes is the young Greek hero, and after Achilles withdraws from the battle, it is Diomedes who takes over initially. Right? He's been convinced, and he is the one who is now leading the battle, so to say. So the gods intervene again, and many a life is saved on either side. Diomedes also injures Aphrodite, who escapes from the battlefield, leaving Aeneas, who was picked up by Apollo, unsaved. Aphrodite escapes to Olympus and is consoled by her mother, Dione, uh, and and is also advised by Zeus to concern herself only with love, right? Because Aphrodite is the goddess of love, and she had, she had gone to the battle when she realizes that her son is in trouble, and she gets injured in the process. So she is complaining to her mother, and both Zeus and her mother Dione tell her that she should not concern herself with affairs of war, but only with love. And then Ares, the god of war, is called by Apollo to set right Diomedes, causing havoc on the battlefield. Ares infuriates the Trojans. Aeneas launches into the fray once again, and Hector's prowess makes Diomedes shudder. So, if you can see that how quick and rapid is this action happening, right? So Diomedes has taken over. Then, because Diomedes is injuring people, and there is an imbalance sort of a thing, then the gods themselves intervene, and Ares, who's the god of war, is now taking over. And again, Hector is talked about here. Hector, whom Achilles kills, right? So finally, Diomedes is also frightened with Hector's prowess, and the battle goes on while the Greeks fall back. Both Hera and Athena come to the rescue of the Greeks with the permission of Zeus. He does not want to upset the balance by destroying the whole Greek army, which it seems Ares is bent upon doing, right? So Zeus, as the supreme god, or as the head of all Olympus, or all the gods and goddesses, decides that there should not be an imbalance, and therefore he kind of takes Ares back from the battlefield. So Diomedes injures Ares with the help of Athena, but Zeus has no consolation for Ares when he comes to him with complaints. He orders the healing god to cure him, and he sits along with Hera and Athena in the halls of Olympus. Right. So while we are looking at the story, I hope you're also trying to understand, you know, how are these characters sketched really? How is the character of Zeus also emerging from the kind of uh, instances that are happening here, right? So he tries to keep his balance. He tries also sometimes to make peace between people, and he listens to few. He does not listen to a few, right? So there are multiple perspectives that are emerging here as far as the character of Zeus is also concerned. Now, in Book 6, the battle continues and the gods are no longer on the scene. Hellenist, who's the son of Priam, comes calling to Hector and Aeneas. He is endowed with the gift of augury. Augury is he can predict what is going to happen, right? And we said that predictions, foretellings, oracles, prophecy is something which is very, very important throughout your entire Greek paper, so to say, but also here in this particular book called the Iliad. And he requests Aeneas to hold back the retreating Trojans while the Greek troops are getting the better of them. Hector is requested to go back to the city. He has to tell the women there to offer the gift of a fine robe and sacrifice 12 heifers in Athena's shrine so that she takes pity on Troy, right? So Athena and Hera, as we said, they are the patrons of the Greek cause, and therefore, Hector, who is on the Trojan side, is telling the women in his city to pray to Athena to also take pity on Troy. Hector accordingly speaks to the Trojans to instill courage in them. Diomedes meets Glaucus, the Trojan he's about to fight. Diomedes wants to know who he is as he has never seen him before. Now, Bellerophon, Glaucus says, was his ancestor. So Diomedes and Glaucus trace back the friendship of their families, right? So they are, although they are on the opposite sides, they meet and they get to understand that they have a common ancestry, and therefore they promise to revive this old family friendship and never to hurt each other, though they belong to the opposite camps. They exchange their armor and thus seal the bond of friendship, right? So as we said, as much as importance that the Greeks give to enmity, they also give a lot of emphasis on their friendships, and this is one of those instances where we can see that although the warriors belong to different or opposing camps, but they do not want to hurt each other because they are old friends or their families were old friends, and therefore they exchange their armor, sealing their bond of friendship. Now Hector comes to Troy, and to the anxious queries regarding the dear men from the Trojan women, Hector can only tell them to pray to the gods. Right? So somebody was asking about the role of women in the book the last time, or in the war the last time. So we see that they do not participate in the war, but they fulfill these kind of roles, right? Praying to the gods about the war, and just um, making sacrifices, all of that. So Hector tells Hecuba, who's his mother, to offer the gift and sacrifices to Athena so that she may take pity on Troy and hold back Diomedes, right? So Diomedes is becoming this overwhelming presence, and Hector is, also trying that in some way or the other, by appeasing the gods, by pleasing the gods, probably Diomedes can be stopped. So the Trojan women offer the gifts and prayer to Athena, but she refuses their prayer, right? So Athena is not willing to support the Trojan cause at all, although the Trojans are praying to her. Now Hector visits the bedroom of Paris and Helen. Remember, Paris had been taken away by Aphrodite, and now Hector, who's the brother of Paris, visits the bedroom of Paris and Helen. He taunts Paris for sitting in the safe haven while his countrymen are shedding blood for a war. Right? So you see here that Hector again comes as this person who cares a lot about his people, right? About his army also, brought upon them by Paris himself. So Paris is the one who has, taken away Helen, and now you see that Helen is again, and sorry, so Paris is again back to his bed chamber. He did not fight with Menelaus, and that is why Hector is taunting him. So Paris assures Hector that he will soon return to the battlefield. He had only come to his room to plunge himself in grief. Helen requests Hector to take rest for a while. She speaks of herself as the one to have brought misfortune on all, and she speaks of Paris as one who has no self-respect. Right. So here, Helen is kind of reflecting on her role in the war, and she says that she is the one because of whom all of this death and devastation and misfortune has fallen. And she also says that Paris is does not have any self-respect. He does not want to fight the war, right? So but Hector has no time to stay. He speaks kindly to Helen to make Paris go to the battlefield. For himself, his heart bleeds for the suffering Trojans, but before he returns to the field, he must see his wife and baby son. Right? So these are instances where you would see that the humanity or the domesticity of these warring soldiers is also brought to light. Now, Andromache, who is the wife of Hector, weeps to see Hector, telling him that his fiery courage is sure to destroy him soon. Asking what will happen to her and her son, Hector feels pity for her and for his son too, and for his son too. So as we see, the soldiers also have their wife, their family, their children to look after, and Andromache is very upset, right, about Hector participating in the war in like this, and she reminds Hector that what would happen to her and her son after the death of Hector. So Hector realizes, this, and he feels pity. So this is a very emotional sort of moment in the book, and it makes his heart bleed to think that in his absence she will be held captive by his enemies. But since nobody can escape fate, Hector too must go down fighting. Right? So Hector is touched by what his wife is saying, by what by the sight of his son Astyanax, but then he feels that he has to go to battle. He cannot escape his fate. He cannot not fight a war. He has to fulfill his duty. So he kisses his son, wishing he becomes a better man than his father. So Hector leaves for the battlefield, joined by Paris. Another thing that you can probably note down here is that Hecuba, who's the mother of Hector, kind of supports Hector and tells him that he needs to go back to war, although he's kind of touched by the sight of his wife and son. But Hecuba is, this person as the mother of Hector, who places the glory of Hector before his familiar life and before his son and wife. So Homer communicates the scope and intensity of the battle with long descriptive passages of mass slaughter, yet he intersperses these descriptions with intimate characterization, thereby personalizing the violence, right? So it is not just, numbers that we're talking about in terms of the large scale of, casualties that has happened, right? And we all kind of can understand this, especially now when we are again in that situation in terms of the pandemic, that these are not just numbers, right? People dying has a sort of impact which is not only about the statistics, right? So this humanizing aspect is brought to uh, the fore by by Homer when he personalizes the suffering of people and personalizes the violence, right? How is the family suffering? How are the people, the warriors also feeling, right? All of that is also told to us. So Homer often fleshes out the characters being killed by telling stories about their backgrounds or upbringings, right? So he reflects these characters and he talks about these characters not only as okay, so this person is dead now, but also talks about their backgrounds and upbringings, individualizing these characters, giving them, personal attributes. So Homer often alternates between the descriptions of depictions of Trojan and Achaean deaths, sometimes rendering the victor of the first exchange the victim of the next. In this way, he injects a sense of rhythm into what would otherwise be a numbing litany of mass destruction, right? So he moves both ways. He talks about the Trojan deaths, he talks about the Achaean deaths, and there is a sense of rhythm that prevails in the narrative. This is also important if you think about it in terms of the oral poetic tradition, right? That to remember, to memorize such a long, such a long epic, such a long poem, what do you need to do? You have to maintain some sort of a rhythm in terms of not only the rhyme, the meter, and all of that, the formal elements, but also in terms of this repetitive strategy, right? And to probably alternate episodes so that you can go back to that episode and you maintain the continuity of the narrative. So the battle narratives also give Homer the chance to comment on the similarities and differences between the mortals and the gods, right? So this is again something that we've talked about, and I think I'm not going to now talk about this in detail. Probably when we go to the next portion, we can talk about this. So we have already talked about this, and let us move to the next slide. So Homer achieves such great pathos not only with the words of Hector and Andromache, but also with with the setting and effective detailing. Right. So he talks about the city space. He talks about this wall. He talks about how the women are inside the city, how the men are fighting out there. Right. So that kind of a setting also in terms of creating that alienation, creating that space, also kind of helps in creating this pathos, right? This suffering, this kind of a negative, sadness and all of that that we may feel while we look at these characters. So this emotional sort of a setup is not only created with words, but also with the setting of the narrative. And as Andromache nurses baby Astyanax, the audience is reminded of the way in which war separates families and deprives the innocent. When Hector hastily removes his crested helmet upon seeing how it frightens Astyanax, right? So there is the small nuance of this episode here, where Astyanax, who's just a small baby, right, looks at Hector when he is going there to meet his wife and his baby son. Um, when Hector, Hector is all armed. He has his helmet on. So he sees that Astyanax is immediately afraid. The baby is immediately afraid of Hector. So he removes his helmet, and we realize that this is a great warrior who has just affirmed his glorious aspirations and his iron will to fight, but also possesses a tender side, right? So towards his son, he is very, very tender, and this is what we see. Remember, he's just told his brother that he is not fighting and he's put everybody at risk, and he should fight, and he's just convinced his brother. Also, now when his wife is saying that you should not go to battle, or probably what happens to us when we get killed, but he says that I have to do it, and it is my responsibility and all of that. But towards the sun, he is still tender. So, book 7 now. As both the brothers enter the battlefield, they fight the Greeks. As both brothers, meaning Paris and Hector now. They fight the Greeks. Athena again rushes down to help the Greeks. At the same moment, Apollo intercepts her. The two decide to call a halt to the battle, at least for the day, and agree to another individual combat. Right. So now again, there is a moment where the battle is stopped, at least for the day, and another individual combat is talked about at this point of time. Now, Hellenist, who is the Trojan augur, who is the Trojan soothsayer, philosopher, sorry, Trojan foreteller, he tells Hector to challenge a Greek to duel. The challenge is made by Hector and accepted by the Greek Ajax. After the Greek, after the day-long fight, the combatants part in friendship, exchanging gifts. Right. So there are moments when from the troops fighting there are individual combats that happen, and this is one of those moments. At night, the Greeks hold an assembly and decide to build a protective wall around the ships and a trench outside the wall. And another assembly is held in Troy, where Antenor the Trojan elder proposes that Helen should be restored to the Greeks and thus the war should end. But Paris rejects the proposal. He is prepared to give back the treasures he had once brought from Argos, adding his own to it. Priam, the Trojan king, agrees and decides to send the herald Idaeus to the Greek camp at dawn to moot the proposal. They're asked to stop the fight for the day so that the dead bodies could be burned. Right. So now deliberations happen on both the sides. Greeks are planning to build a wall, and the Trojans are planning to end the war by returning, Helen and everything back to the Greeks. But then Paris is not willing to return Helen, and they still go back with gifts and all to the Greek camp so that they put an end to the war. But then the Greeks refuse. And then another fact that is important here is that they also pay immense importance to proper burial of the dead, right? So this is not only for the case of Hector. This happens time and again in the epic when the battle is halted for the dead bodies to be burned or to be deserving their proper burial. So the Greeks do not agree to accept the treasures offered by Paris. They say they do not want to accept even Helen, as the Trojans are now sure to be defeated. As for the cessation of the hostilities for the day, they readily agree to it. Right? So they agree to stopping the war for the day, but they say that the Greeks would win the war and therefore they do not want any prizes, gifts, or even Helen now. They want to win the war. So both sides burn the bodies of their soldiers, washing the blood and weeping warm tears. Then the Greeks build their proposed wall, but the sea god Poseidon complains that the Greeks are building their wall without offering any sacrifice to the gods. Zeus gives him permission to destroy the walls after the war ends and the Greeks leave for home. Right? So again, you see that this is the concern that Poseidon has. Right? Poseidon, the sea god, is angry. Why? Because he says that the walls should be destroyed. Why? Because they did not give offerings to the god when they planned on constructing these walls. So in book 8, Zeus speaks to the assembled gods and goddesses. Remember, at this point of time, the gods and goddesses are intervening way too much in the battle. So he warns them that they must not try to help either the Trojans or the Greeks, or they will be severely punished. So it is the day of the Trojans, and Hector goes on winning and covering himself with glory. Now Queen Hera in Olympus speaks to Poseidon to help the Greeks, which the sea god refuses to do as he is afraid of Zeus. Now Zeus has made this clear to everybody, to all the gods and goddesses, that they should not be participating in the war, they should not be interfering in the war. But again, Hera and Athena are still not convinced. They are still trying to intervene, and But Poseidon, who's the sea god, is kind of reluctant and does not want to go against Zeus. Both Hera and Athena now get ready to enter the field to help their favorites. They, of course, are not able to do so as Zeus orders them to desist forthwith. So Zeus does not let them, intervene anymore. Hector is therefore triumphant. Hector wins, with divine will backing him. The Trojans keep a night long vigil with 100 fires burning. Right? So, this is what happens in book 8. Right. So, coming to the analysis of this of the books that we are going to study. Okay. Okay, I think for just 10 minutes, I'll take some of the questions and then we'll come to the books because, probably you will not be able to comprehend the further things if your questions are not answered by this time. Okay. Right, so just let me look at the questions. Okay. Achilles withdraws himself from the war because of his quarrel with Agamemnon, who snatches away his war prize. Um, the gods intervene in the battle because, here there is no difference. The gods have their favorites. They also have their children who are a part of the war. So there is no such division. We have already gone through 8 books. I began with book 1, right? I also talked about the plot summary the last time and also about, everything else in terms of introducing the book, the background and everything. Today, what we are doing is covering the entire summary of the book, right? So that you're completely familiar with the book and, we can complete our analysis and themes and questions in the next class. You do not need, see, these are 24 chapters in the same epic, so to say. When we say 24 books, these are, these are a part of the same book, the Iliad. So you just need to get a copy of the Iliad. The gods start the war again because of their own personal interest, right? They're not happy with, the mortals deciding on. And of course, as we said, that when at this particular time, the gods have already intervened, right? The combat that happened between Paris and Menelaus was not completed, and it could not have been the final deciding factor. Trojans were not Greeks. See, I have all kind of answered all of these questions in the previous class. Greeks and Trojans are fighting this war. They're the opposite parties. They do everything in terms of gods taking the sides of their favorites or gods really talking about, justice. It is not so much of an idea of justice that happens most of the times. It is mostly favoritism that happens, and that is why it provides comic relief, right? That is why their quarrels and squabbles are not really important or really serious, because they kind of only talk about supporting who people who are their favorites. It is mostly a bias rather than something of a more noble cause. No, Helen did not intentionally run away with Paris. It is actually, a part of the greater plan. And as we said, that she was promised by the goddess, and as the fairest of all, that she will, give Paris the most fairest women of them all, and therefore Helen is taken away, right? So she is not really there with her full consent, so to say. Zeus is the head of all the gods, that is what we said, and his role in the epic is to actually preside over the gods in the Olympus, and also to make, you know, to actually make the two sides, Greeks and Trojans. It is Zeus who's kind of deciding at most of the points to check over the gods that there is no imbalance in the battle. That is, Zeus is not supporting either Trojans or Greeks all the time, right? He shifts sides. So we cannot really say that he is only supporting the Trojans and not the Achaeans. Right. So there is a difference between somebody's asked that, what about how can goddesses participate in the war when women are not allowed to fight the war, right? So goddesses are not mortal women. These roles are for mortal women. These rules are really for mortal women. So for goddesses, there is no rule of such kind. They can actually influence the war. They're not participating in terms of they're not fighting in the war, but they can influence the war. Hasten home, probably, I think probably you did not get it. Hasten is to run back home, to go back to home, right? Hurriedly. Yeah. So Diomedes is, of course, aided by the gods to actually now especially Athena to now you know take over in the absence of Achilles. So he has the divine will backing him. Hector, you understand, is of course the chief warrior on the Trojan side. He's the brother of Paris. So somebody is saying that Greeks had egoistic issues and Paris has not done something right, even if he's got a boon. He must have seen that she is married and that to a king, and his action would result in a war. Right. Of course, but to talk about this, firstly, he understands probably that this will result in a war. The Greeks are not going to stay, all pacified and do nothing if if one of their queens is being snatched away. But then, we also need to understand that this is not as simple as it may sound here, in terms of the fact that, uh, you know, it is actually happening at that time that women are at the center of this war, in terms of the fact that they are considered as prizes. They are not considered as women. They are not considered as human beings with their own will, with their own choices, right? Nobody is asking her what she wants, right? So she's just taken away. So you see that it is all in terms of that they do not care. They are going to do what they want to do. So Paris, realizing his mistake or not, that question does not really arise for him at all, because he is the least interested. He's shown us this self-centered character who is not so much interested in the war that goes on, which he himself has kind of initiated by taking away Helen. But it is about fulfilling his own desires. It is not about anything else for him. Yeah, there are some sort of references uh, and similarities that you can take up, but in terms of how we understand some portrayals of some gods on in the Indian plane, and some portrayals of the gods that we see in Greek mythology. But then to equate the two would not be so relevant. And I would suggest that you do not at least do it in your exams, but for your own understanding, for your own reference, you can kind of, look for similarities. Guys, a lot of you are talking about, me translating. I cannot do that. This is an English class. We have to talk in English. We'll be talking about the gods, the role of the gods in detail, and probably some of your questions would be answered there. No, Achilles is not an immortal. He is mortal, and he very much knows that he is going to die after killing Hector. Right. Okay. So I think these are most of the questions that we can take up now. Let us move back to the books, the summary, and the analysis. Right. Okay. And class, of course, I would request, I would urge all of you that since we get so limited time, right? Um, if you skip classes, it is going to be very, very difficult for you to understand and to catch up, right? So please do not skip classes. If you are attending classes, you will get familiar with the characters, you will get familiar with what is happening, what is the plot, right? Who is who. So please try to attend all the classes. Please do not skip classes. And if you are actually coming to class without, probably attending one of the previous classes, then, at least try to know what has happened in the previous class, or read up a summary of the text. At least you know which text is being talked about. So read up a summary or a brief summary of the text online, so that you have some idea about what is going on, because it becomes extremely difficult for us, provided the time constraint that we have, to go back to things that we've already discussed time and again, right? Especially with this kind of an epic, you understand that this is a huge, huge book. So I cannot really be repeating things so often. Although I'm trying to do that, trying to answer things, but then it is not always possible. And we'll talk about the role of the gods, right? We'll talk about all of that. So please wait for that to come along. We are talking about the role of the gods. We're talking about the human qualities and all of that, right? About your group, of course, we'll be uh, there are there is somebody taking care of that, so you can probably talk to them. Okay, so I'll just quickly get back to the summary so that we are able to complete the book in time, and then towards the end of the class I'll just come back to you. So the catastrophic reversal of the Achaeans' fortunes not only adds drama and suspense to the poem, but also marks a development to the gods feuding. Okay, probably I think, yeah. Huh. So we are talking about the analysis of both the books, book 7 and 8. So the catastrophic reversal of the Achaeans' fortune, right? Now, it is the Trojans who are leading the battle, right? So it adds the drama and suspense to the poem, but also marks a development in the gods feuding and aids the progression of the overall plot, right? So we know that the readers of Homer already know, because this legend was popular, that the Trojan War was actually won by the Greeks, right? So it adds, the drama and suspense that the Greeks are now losing and the Trojans are becoming more and more influential and powerful. They are the winning side right now. So this adds a certain drama, suspense, and leads to the progression of the overall plot. Now, the encounter between Hector and Ajax in Book 7, which ends with them exchanging arms and thereby sealing an unsettled conflict with a pact of friendship, demonstrates the value placed on respect and individual dignity. We see that the Greek culture places great significance in both enmity and friendship, on both the taking of lives and giving of gifts, and each has its proper place. The characters and the text itself seem to see the improper balancing of these opposites as a manifestation of an individual's worthiness, right? So it is not only about killing people, it is not only about enmity, it is also about the friendship, the individual dignity. So another episode that showcases this happens in Book 7, where Hector and Ajax exchange gifts after their duel or after their combat has finished. So another aspect of the ancient Greek value system emerges in the agreement both sides made to pause their fighting to bury their respective dead. To the Greeks, piety demanded giving the dead, especially those who had died so gloriously, a proper burial. Right? So this is something that we've already spoken about. Now, book 9, right? So for all these 8 books, uh, Achilles had disappeared, right? Achilles was in the background only. Now in book 9, we have the reference to Achilles again. Since the Greeks are at a disadvantage, the king despairingly tells his troops to prepare to sail back home. Again, you see, you know, that the Greeks are losing, and therefore, they are again in a dilemma about whether to continue with the battle or not. But Diomedes voices his opposition to such a defeatist attitude. He declares that the Greek army will never acknowledge defeat, and all the Greeks shout their assent, and thus it is assured that they will continue to fight. An assembly of the commanders and senior chiefs is held. Then Nestor advises Agamemnon to send an embassy to Achilles to make him forget his anger with soothing words and gifts. Agamemnon acknowledges his fault and agrees to make amends. He agrees to return Briseis' daughter, who was seized from Achilles. He promises to give one of his daughters in marriage to Achilles, along with a magnificent dowry. Other invaluable gifts are also promised, so Achilles may forget his anger and agree to participate in the war. Leading Greek chiefs, Phoenix, Ajax, and Odysseus, carry the message to Achilles. Achilles receives them warmly and offers them lavish hospitality, but refuses to join the war and rejects the offer of reconciliation made by Agamemnon. He decides to return home. His tutor Phoenix tries to make him relent, but to no avail. He is requested to spend the night in the camp of Achilles, which he does. The rest of the group go back with the depressing news. The Greeks feel disappointed, but Diomedes declares that they will fight on even without Achilles, and everyone agrees. Right? So here Achilles appears, as we said, and Agamemnon realizes his fault, but he does not, say sorry to Achilles. But he promises him extravagant things. He says that he'll also give him back his prize. He also wants to give him gifts so that he comes back and joins the war. But Achilles, again, in his anger, he refuses the offer. So in book 10, the whole episode takes place in the night. Agamemnon and Menelaus are worried about the Greek fate in the battle. They cannot sleep, and the others are called to meet and decide on a plan of action. In the meeting, also attended by Nestor, Odysseus, and Diomedes, it is decided to send a spy to the Trojan camp to find out their strategy and plan of action. Diomedes volunteers for the job and selects Odysseus as a partner in this mission. The same thing happens in the Trojan camp. Hector induces one Dolon to go out to the Greek camp and find out whether the fleet is still guarded as before or not. He is promised the horse of Achilles if he is successful in his mission. Unfortunately, Dolon is caught by the Greek pair of Diomedes and Odysseus, and as soon as he steps out of the Trojan camp, he is a coward and blurts out the information about the true position in the Trojan camp to the Greeks. But he cannot save himself and is killed. Diomedes and Odysseus kill the Thracian soldiers with their king Rhesus. They drive away the magnificent horses of the Thracian king, and with Athena's advice quickly depart from the Trojan camp. They are received with great joy in the Greek camp, and the Thracians, awakened by Apollo, fight to their dismay. Their havoc wrought in their camp by the Greek marauders or the raiders, right? So both the armies, both the troops are actually sending somebody like an informant, like a raider, to find out what is happening in the other camp, right? And Odysseus and Diomedes go there to the Trojan camp, and from the Trojan camp, it is Dolon who is coming out. So Dolon is, of course, captured, and Odysseus and Diomedes get to know about the Trojan strategy. And now, in all of this is happening during the night, right? So while Agamemnon's bountiful offer of sumptuous gifts to Achilles may sound like a superficial gesture, it is important to remember that the ancients conceived of material possessions, whether won in battle or awarded by kings, as indicators of personal honor, right? So all this appeasement that is offered to Achilles is to be taken as personal honor by Achilles, but Even then, he refuses that. So, nevertheless, though Agamemnon is generous in his offerings, which he believes will honor Achilles like a god, he still essentially calls for Achilles to accept what his status, that his status is lower than Agamemnon's. Let him bow down to me. I am the greater king, he cries out, illustrating that Agamemnon, though perhaps more pragmatic, is just as self-centered as Achilles. Right? So he refuses to bow down to Achilles, and Achilles refuses to accept the offer. So the embassy to Achilles constitutes one of the most touching scenes in the Iliad. Homer achieves this effect largely through an exchange of narratives which illuminate Achilles' upbringing and hint at his ultimate fate beyond the scope of the epic. Ostensibly, each side presents these stories to persuade the other side, but Homer uses them to humanize Achilles, to give us a glimpse of the past and the future. Although Achilles' pride and rage define the thematic concerns of the epic, they also result in Achilles' absence from most of the action of the poem, right? So, although we are talking about, this epic being written about the wrath or the anger of Achilles, for most of the poem, for most of the epic, Achilles is really missing from action, right? Because it is also about, him being upset and not participating in the war. Through these episodes, like this embassy being sent to Achilles, we get to know about the character. Now, book 11, the Greeks are eager for fight as Zeus sends the goddess Thrice, inflaming the spirit of war among them. Agamemnon gets ready and calls his men to arms. The Trojans too are ready for the battle, along with Hector and the other leaders. It is Agamemnon who fights fiercely, killing many Trojans. Zeus sends his messenger Iris to tell Hector that he must not move till Agamemnon is wounded and leaves the battlefield. And very soon Agamemnon is severely wounded, retiring from the battlefield. That provides the signal for Hector to join the fray. Odysseus, Ajax, Diomedes, and the physician Machaon fight fiercely, but all are seriously wounded. Achilles observes Nestor carrying Machaon, wounded, from the field. In order to make sure, he asks his friend Patroclus to go and ask Nestor the name of the wounded man. Patroclus goes at once to Nestor and sees for himself that the injured man is no other than Machaon. Nestor detains Patroclus, telling him a story of one of his past exploits. He also requests him to take part in the fight with the armor of Achilles on his person so that Patroclus may be mistaken for Achilles. Patroclus goes back to Achilles with this message, but on his way he comes across Eurypylus, who asks him for help since the healer Machaon is wounded and needed looking after. Patroclus stays with him and applies herbs to his wound. Right. So now the book is really turning its course. When you see that sorry, Achilles is actually made that offer, but he had refused. And then his friend, his squire, his comrade, Patroclus, right? He is now being called to fight. As we know that Achilles had also detained Patroclus and his entire Myrmidon army from fighting the war because his honor was wounded, and therefore you see that since the Greeks are, suffering, therefore Nestor, who is again this peacemaker, this orator, now asks Patroclus to fight in place of Achilles, wearing the armor of Achilles, so that the Trojans mistake him for Achilles. Now, in the book 12, the wall the Greeks build for their defense is doomed to fall, but only when the battle is over, right? So, this was decided by Zeus on the behest of Poseidon. In their hurry, the Greeks did not pay their dues to the gods, so Poseidon and Apollo decide to smash the rampart eventually. For now, the battle rages on, with the Trojans trying to attack the wall. The horses, however, cannot cross the ditch, protected by rows of sharp stakes, and the Trojans came fighting on foot. The Greeks cannot withstand the might of Hector, endowed with glory by Zeus. He burst through the gates and Trojans follow him, the Greeks retreat to their ships, right? So as you can see here again, as one of the questions said, you can see that Zeus now is supporting Hector, right? So it is not like Zeus would always support the Greeks only. So he bursts through the gates and Trojans follow him. The Greeks retreat to their ships. So first, Zeus firmly manipulates the battle from showering the Achaeans with blood to enabling Hector to become the first Trojan to cross the Achaean fortifications. Right. So until now, we were seeing that Greeks were supported by Zeus, but now he's supporting the Trojan Hector to be actually crossing over to their area. The Greeks or the Achaeans recognize his presence and realize that in fighting the Trojans, they pit themselves against the king of the gods, right? So now the Greeks realize that they're not just fighting, you know, uh, the Trojans, they're also fighting Zeus. Diomedes even interprets Zeus's acts of favoritism to mean that Zeus has singled out the Trojans for ultimate victory. At the same time, however, the epic frequently reminds us of a second case of divine plotting. According to Zeuss, Troy is fated to fall, right? So at this moment of time, it looks like, Diomedes feels that since Zeus is favoring, uh, Hector, the Trojans, therefore the Trojans are supposed to win the war. But then on the second level of the epic, we are also time and again reminded that it is the Greeks who are supposed to win the battle. So Homer builds this dramatic tension by juxtaposing prophecy that the Greeks are supposed to win with vivid descriptions of the Achaean suffering and setbacks. He constantly tempts us with the expectation of Trojan defeat while dashing this prospect with endless examples of Trojan success under Zeus's partiality. Ultimately, we feel unable to trust either set of signs, right? So this dramatic tension is built up, right? So Zeus is favoring the Trojans. We are shown Trojans succeeding at many instances, and we also know that it is the Greeks who are going to win ultimately. So we do not know what is really happening at this moment of time, right? So although we know everything about the Trojan War, although Homer's readers already knew that Troy would fall, right? But at this moment in time, um, the kind of influence, the intervention that there is by Zeus is confusing the readers. So, and also the Greek army. So as the text gives information on the background of Patroclus, we begin to wonder whether Patroclus shares Achilles' rage and whether he may wish to rejoin the fight despite his loyalty to his friend. Right? So Patroclus again, we will see he does not really approve of Achilles' decision himself. Right? Although he supports him, but he feels that Achilles should really support the Greek cause and he should not withdraw while his people suffer. So the scene between Patroclus and Nestor also contains an instance of foreshadowing, hinting at what happens when Patroclus does finally rejoin the battle. Homer writes that Patroclus's doom is sealed as soon as Achilles calls for him to instruct him to speak with Nestor. Right? So now we know that Patroclus will be killed by Hector, and Achilles will now rejoin the battle to avenge the death of his friend Patroclus. So all of this is foretold, by this one sentence where Patroclus is doomed is what is said by Homer. So it is Nestor who gives Patroclus the idea of returning to battle dressed in Achilles' armor, by means of which tactic Patroclus meets his death. The reference to Patroclus' doom not only foreshadows Patroclus' end, but also points towards the event that finally motivates Achilles himself to return to the battle. Right? So it is at this point that Achilles will decide to return to battle. So all of this is foretold in a sense by this interaction between Patroclus and Nestor. Now, Book 13, the earth shaker god Poseidon comes to inspire the Greeks to greater efforts to fight the Trojans. In the form of Calchas the prophet, he first speaks to both the great and little Ajax, asking them to defend their position strongly. He touches them to fill them with strength and striking force. They recognize the god's voice through his assumed persona. When his grandson Amphimachus dies, Poseidon is full of anger and projects himself as Thoas before the Cretan captain Idomeneus. Idomeneus stops the Trojan assault with the god's aid and the assistance of Menelaus. Poseidon further helps the Greeks by saving Nestor's son Antilochus from sure death. Menelaus wounds Hellenist and kills Pisander, crying against the Trojans for stealing his wife. Hector is advised by Polydamas to call his troops, drawing them into one unit. Hector goes around rallying his men. When he comes across Paris, he mocks him for his love of women and fear of battle. As Hector hears Ajax say that Troy is bound to fall, he taunts him in return, and the battle goes on. Right? So a lot is, you know, we see that although Zeus had uh, denied or had asked every god not to intervene in the battle, but that influence is constantly continuing, and we see that all of this happens mostly because of their own sons and grandsons are also involved, right, in the battle. So this, and again, it is not only just about this favoritism, it is also about the fact that the gods are also uh, carrying on the action, and they know what the individual fates of these characters are. So we'll see that there are instances when they'll remind Zeus himself that that the individual fate, right? The fate of the characters, the fate of the mortals cannot be changed, right? So they are the ones who are also participating to make fate happen, right? So their role is not only limited to the practicing favoritism, but also in terms of continuing the battle or making the results of the battle occur really. So in book 14, Agamemnon loses hope and proposes to retreat to the sea and eventually sail home. But Odysseus is opposed to it, and Diomedes suggests that the leaders must take their positions, wounded though they are, and spur their men to action. This is approved by all. Poseidon comes to Agamemnon in the form of an old man and speaks disapprovingly of Achilles, who sits idly to see so many Greeks killed. The gods may strike him down, he says, and the Trojans will soon flee for Troy. The Greeks take heart as the god gives a cry like the yell of 10,000 warriors. The goddess Hera now tries to come to the aid of the Greeks with the help of an elaborate plan. She dresses nicely and then, on her way to entice Zeus, asks Aphrodite for charms. She hides her real purpose and tells Aphrodite that she wants the charms to reunite the quarreling couple, Oceanus and Tethys. After securing the wherewithal from Aphrodite, Hera approaches the god Sleep. She wants help from him to make Zeus fall asleep immediately after finishing their love making. Sleep is too scared to do this, remembering the close shave he had earlier while attempting a similar ploy, but he agrees eventually, tempted by Hera to get one of the Graces in marriage. Armed with her strategy, Hera descends on Mount Ida. As expected, she charms Zeus and then he is conquered by sleep. Immediately, sleep goes to Poseidon, informing him of the deep sleep which enfolds Zeus. Poseidon can now help the Greeks, which he does. Soon, Hector is severely wounded, and his friends take him away from the battlefield. The battle goes on. Right. So you see in this book how the gods maneuver their way through. So it is by tactics, it is by strategy, it is by the use of sort of magic. All of that happens, right? So here, Hera, who's the wife of Zeus, has kind of, um, taken over Zeus by sleep so that she can change the course of the battle. So the scene between Hera and Zeus in Book 14 provides some comic relief. Once again, it is striking how issues of life and death in the mortal world are so often determined by petty feuds in the gaudy realms. Here, the decisive turn in the battle results from Zeus's libido and Aphrodite's gullibility, as well as Hera's indignant mischievousness, right? So it is actually now Hector is wounded because of this episode that Hera crafts, right? So she has decided to play mischief. Now Aphrodite is unable to find that out, and Zeus is too libidinous to, uh, you know, probably resist Hera. So this is what happens, that because of the god's own petty mischief, what happens is that the mortals suffer in the war. So general attention is paid in books 13 and 14 to the tactical rather than the physical aspects of war, right? So as we know that wars are not only about the physical strength, but also about tactics and strategy, right? So this is what is highlighted in books 13 and 14. The fighting described in these books entails less chaos and more controlled movement between groups of men, right? So here it is less chaos, here it is less a display of strength, but more brain involved, more controlled movement. Now, Polydamas and Hector discuss which part of the line needs reinforcement, and Poseidon urges the Achaeans to redistribute their arms more efficiently between stronger and weaker soldiers. Right. So, another instance of how the armies are really structured. How is the war being strategized? Even Hera's collaboration with Poseidon and her deception of Zeus and Aphrodite contrast with the brute force that Zeus uses to put the Trojans ahead in book 8 to 12. Right? So now Hera is acting tacitly. She has a tactic, right? While Zeus uses his brute force to actually maneuver the course of the battle. So this is the change that we see. Right. Now, in book 15, Zeus awakens from the charmed sleep induced by Hera's machinations. He's shocked to see Hector badly wounded and is very angry with Hera. He reminds her of an earlier punishment she had received due to disobedience, but Hera denies her role in making the Trojans slide in battle. Poseidon alone is responsible for it, she says. Zeus accepts her apology and summons Apollo and Iris to his presence. He clearly outlines his plan. Apollo will now restore strength to Hector. Then the Greeks will receive such a beating from the Trojans that they will be pushed back to their ships. Patroclus will then be sent to fight and will eventually be killed by Hector. Then Zeus is going to turn the tide of the war. Achilles will kill Hector, being angered by the death of his friend. This way, Zeus is going to fulfill his promise to Thetis to vindicate Achilles. Hera is sent back to Olympus. She tells the other gods that Zeus has threatened that unless all obey him and maintain order, he will punish them. Ares alone among all the gods is ready to defy Zeus as his son has been killed and he is prepared to go to the battlefield to avenge his son's death. But Athena stops him, telling him that Zeus will punish everybody in Olympus for his transgression. Zeus sends Iris and Apollo on their separate missions. Iris goes to Poseidon, persuading him to withdraw on the orders of Zeus. Apollo goes to revive Hector and assure the Trojans of his help. The onslaught of the Trojans is now almost impossible to counteract, and the battle reaches a crisis. Patroclus leaves Eurypylus to the care of an aide, and he rushes back to Achilles to persuade him to join the battle to help the Greeks. A desperate battle rages on, with Hector urging the Trojans to seize the Greek ships. Ajax tries his best to repel the attack, and the Trojans start setting the Greek ships afire, right? So you now see the role of Zeus in a major way in book 15 when he decides, when he details out his plan, and he says that he will punish any god who will now intervene, right? So Zeus is now angry. He decides what is going to be the course of the battle, and we know that things are going to turn from here. Patroclus is now grief-stricken at the beating the Greeks have taken. He tells Achilles that he at least should be allowed to go to fight for the Greeks, right? So all of this is happening as per Zeus's plan. Wearing Achilles' armor, Achilles agrees, though he still cannot forget the insult heaped upon him by Agamemnon. He will not fight until the Trojan attack reaches his own ships. Patroclus is allowed to go and fight along with the Myrmidon army, but he is warned not to pursue the Trojans into the city or kill Hector. Achilles goes to call Myrmidon army to fight as Patroclus puts on Achilles' armor, right? So Patroclus is taking both Achilles' armor and Achilles' army, Myrmidon army. So of course he'll be mistook for Achilles himself, as Nestor says. So Achilles goes to pour out libations to Father Zeus, praying that Patroclus should achieve glory in battle and come back safe. Zeus hears his prayers but decides that though the Trojan onslaught will be fought off by Patroclus, he will not return safe. Right? So Achilles goes to Zeus now to pray to him. Uh, but Patroclus will achieve glory in the battle, but he will not come back safe. He'll die as Zeus had planned. So Patroclus goes to fight, and driving the Trojans off the ships, he puts out the fire. The tide of the battle is turned in the favor of the Greeks. The Trojans are trapped between the ships, the trench, and the river. Patroclus kills a number of Trojans, and a fierce combat ensues between Patroclus and Sarpedon. Right? So Patroclus and Sarpedon are now fighting, and Sarpedon is a son of Zeus. Zeus wonders whether he should save his son against his fate. So Queen Hera strongly opposes the desire to save a mortal against his destiny. If Sarpedon is saved, then other gods would also like to have the same privilege for their own sons, many of whom are fighting in the battlefield. At most, Zeus should allow the body of Sarpedon to be moved to Lycia, his homeland, so that he gets a proper burial. Right? So now Sarpedon is killed by Patroclus, right? So let me just, probably we'll continue with book 16 in the next class, so that, or probably just let me finish the slide. I'll not go to the analysis. And since we began a little late, we can probably stay on for a few minutes and look at your questions. So Sarpedon is killed by Patroclus. Before breathing his last, Sarpedon asks his comrade Glaucus to shield his body from being stripped of armor. Glaucus, wounded himself, prays to Apollo to help him fight off the Greeks to save the corpse of his friend. Now, granting his request, Apollo quickly heals his wound. Glaucus at once spurs his Lycian captains on to guard the body of Sarpedon, and then he urges Hector to join the battle to save the body of Sarpedon from any indignity. In the sharp fight between the Greeks and Trojans, so many are killed that the body of Sarpedon can hardly be made out of the mass of the corpses that have fallen. It is the wish of Zeus that the body of Sarpedon be lifted by Apollo from the field and bathed in a river and set down in the green fields of Lycia to be buried with royal rites. It is again the will of Zeus that makes the Trojans retreat from the field, with Patroclus in hot pursuit. Led by Patroclus, the Greeks charge against the wall of Troy, but Apollo hurls the charges back and reminds him that it is not his fate to seize Troy. Hector is now inspired by Apollo, who urges him on. In the shape of Asius, his uncle, Hector goes to fight Patroclus. Apollo goes on to hurl the Greeks back to chaos, handing glory to Hector and the Trojan forces. Patroclus kills Cabriones, the charioteer of Hector. The Greeks seize the body of Cerebriones, and as Patroclus is fighting fiercely, Apollo comes from behind, shrouded in thick mist, and knocks the helmet off his head. Patroclus stands senseless as his armor, lent by Achilles, drops from his shoulders. The young Trojan Euphorbus first wounds him between the shoulder blades, and Hector gives him the death blow to his belly. Standing over the dying Patroclus, Hector mocks him. With his dying breath, Patroclus tells him that only Zeus and Apollo have brought him down, and Hector could kill him because he was already wounded and stripped of his armor. Very soon, destiny is going to overtake Hector too. Right? So I think now you've understood what has happened here, right? In terms of changing the course of the battle, right? All of this is planned and aided by the gods, right? And their own interests are involved. And now Patroclus in book 16 is killed by Hector, and we'll see that now Achilles would soon return and take the revenge. Okay, so let me now go back in the last few minutes of the class to your questions, if there are any, and then we can probably continue with the leftover summary for the 8 books in the next class, along with the themes or other things that we need to talk about. Of course, I've kind of done that throughout the course of our reading also, but then we'll look at it separately again. So does Homer make a distinction between Achaeans and Trojans? Of course, he does. Uh, they are the opposing parties. Okay. I'll forward the PPT to you guys when we have our last class on the 27th for Iliad. Yeah, Achilles gives his armor to Patroclus for fighting the war against the Trojans. Right, so I think those are your questions basically. Right, if there are anything else. Troy and Trojan. Troy is the place, and Trojans are the people who are the residents of that place. Right, so Trojans are again the people of this city called Troy. Right, so please go through the summary again, guys. What you can do is that if you're getting confused and if you're facing these difficulties, right, so there are other people also involved in the battle, in terms of the fact that there are neighbors and there are allies. So these are allies, Rhesus and the Thracian soldiers, the Lycian people, right? All of these are allies of the major, of the main parties, the Greeks and the Trojans. Please, you can read through the summary from your study material again, right, up until book 16, or if you can, up until book 24 for the next class, so that you are familiar with these things, right? We've already talked about, who kills who, what happens where, right? And that would be more clear when we talk about when we actually go through this entire scene or go through the entire summary. Sarpedon, of course, is killed by Patroclus, and Patroclus is killed by Hector. Right? So this is how, but Hector kind of shames Patroclus, right? And Patroclus also foretells the death of Hector. Right? So this is how this book 16 is ending. Okay, so how many books, guys? I've tried to explain it. Let me show you again, probably if I have the book right in my vicinity, right? So this is the book that you have to do, Homer, the Iliad, right? The only book that you have to take. Okay, I shared a picture of the book also, and if I can, just let me probably, also share the WhatsApp group sort of link before I end the class, so that all people who are unable to do that can join the group, and you know, all of this confusion that you guys are facing ends. Okay. I don't think I can help you to join the group because I'm not an admin. Um, okay. So you can probably, you know, uh, in the next class, I think if the admin of the group is there, then I can, yeah, there is a WhatsApp group. In fact, there are three WhatsApp groups, from what I've gathered, and these three WhatsApp groups um, have the teachers also. So you can, but only the admins, and the admins are students, right? So the admins are sending the messages across and all of that. So probably what I'll do in the next class, I'll ask one of the admins to share their number, and then I can probably forward it to you guys here so that you can, or they can send me the link so that I can probably forward the link to every other person who wants to join the WhatsApp group. I had to be fast today because of the fact that we could not complete as much as we had planned in the last class, because I took your questions for a really long time in order to explain things to you. So I had to go a little fast. I'll be slower in the next class. Right, so somebody is asking that, Zeus already knows that, Patroclus will get killed by Hector and Hector will be killed by Achilles. So what was the purpose and motive of the battle? Is it the abduction of Helen? Is it the conflict of honor between Achilles and Agamemnon, or the personal rivalry of the gods, right? So it is one of the motives is said to be the abduction of Helen. It is not about the war is happening between the Trojans and the Greeks, so it is not really about Achilles and Agamemnon fighting. Of course, it is a major part of Achilles being upset and therefore withdrawing from the war. But the war has already been continuing for the 8 preceding years, when Achilles is, the leading force in the war. So it is only in the ninth year that he has this quarrel with Agamemnon and he withdraws himself, but he's there. So the war, these people are like simple soldiers. They have no role to play. It is the warring parties, the kings and the rulers who are deciding to on the war. So what is the motive of the war? Reason that is given is the abduction of Helen, but it is also said that historically it was probably about the conflicting trading interests of both the parties that led to the war. Right. So about the books, I'll be doing three things with you. Right. I am doing Iliad with you. I'll be doing the book of Job and Gospel according to Saint Matthew with you. And finally, I'm also doing with you Plato and Aristotle. Right. So I'll be sending over the PDF of those also on the group. I've sent the PDF of Iliad also. So I'll be doing that so that you can have a copy. Otherwise, you can also download the copies on your own. They're available online. You can search, or you can go to the market and buy the book if you like. I am unable to share the link for the class, for the WhatsApp group class, because I do not have the link myself. I'll have to ask one of the admins to provide me with the link, and then probably I can share it with you in the next class, which is on Wednesday. Okay. So somebody is asking, right? So a lot of people, that is what we've been talking about, that a lot of people here know, right? There are a lot of people who are prophets, who can foretell the future. They are the augurs, but they do not really have the power, the authority to decide the course of the war, right? As astrologers cannot really change your fate, guys, right? They can tell you what is going to happen in the future, but they cannot alter your fate. They cannot alter your destiny, right? So similarly, you can understand that they cannot stop the war. They cannot really, plan the course of action. They can simply tell what is going to happen. Right, so I think there are no other questions. If there are any, you can probably post them down, and the class timings are kind of over. So if you are, if you're okay, then probably I will end the class and we can continue it in the we will continue with the Iliad. We have another 2 hours to devote to the Iliad, and we'll end with some of the themes and major issues of the book in the next class, along with the summary of the 8 books that we are left with, summary and analysis of the 8 books that we are left with. So thank you, class, and I'll try, you know, that the thing that the WhatsApp thing happens to you, so that you're not so confused eventually. Right, so this is the Iliad copy that you would prescribe. This is a Penguin edition, and this is translated, edited by EV Review. Uh, and this edition is also your prescribed edition. When you look at your syllabus, you will be able to find the prescribed edition. Right. So for this class, I think this is it. Right. I'll be ending the class now. Thank you, and we'll meet on the 27th of January, the same time for the same book. Please take care, and please read through the summary if you can, so that if you have any questions regarding the themes and on the other aspects, we can discuss them during our next class. Okay. Thank you.